welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am speaking from, where is it like, okay, so what time is it where you are right now?
It is 7:30 a.m.
Geez, 7:30 a.m. So technically you're speaking to me from the future though, right?
I am. I'm, let's say, a day in the future.
That's crazy.
I'm in your tomorrow.
So this is it's Braidee Otto. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is not a time travel book, nor is it science fiction that we're going to be talking about. It just it's always very fun to me when I get to talk to somebody from the future. So, yes. So, I am here to talk to you about Songbird of the Sorrows, which is a really fun book that it's romantasy, but I would honestly say that like it's got the romantasy qualities in it. However, it's not that the romance itself is necessarily the most overt part of it, which I found to be really interesting. There's so much like political intrigue and, other things going on that it almost like challenges the genre just a bit in a great way. So I loved it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
romantasy is one of those genres where, like, it's not really new, but the name romantasy itself is, I suppose, really gaining traction. And if I was to put mine into a category, like you've kind of got fantasy romance and romantasy and romantic fantasy, I would probably put mine in the romantic fantasy category where the fantasy elements are a bit stronger, particularly in this first book. For the second book, who knows?
Yeah, I'm really curious, but if I was to talk about that, it would be a lot of spoilers, so I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it was a really good read. It had a really great protagonist. The world was very interesting. So why don't you explain in your own words what the book is about and tell us a little bit about how you came to write it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the story follows a princess turned spy who is sent to infiltrate a rival kingdom by competing in a series of high stakes bridal trials. But when the trials take a deadly turn and her former flame, who is also the leader of her team of spies, reignites old feelings, she must navigate the tangled web of duty, desire, and danger to decide whether to follow orders or risk everything to defy them. That, in a nutshell, would probably be my elevator pitch. Of course, there is many more layers to that and many other things that come into play, but I would say at the very surface level, that's what it is. In terms of how I came up with the idea or what inspired it, I think that for me, inspiration comes from so many different places. Like, I wouldn't say that there was one thing in particular, and my answer probably changes every time someone asks me this because of it. So one of my answers is that my partner was playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is a video game, and it happens to be Greek inspired. And that kind of sent me down a tangent of researching Greek myths, which I've always had a very, very strong passion for. And then I stumbled across one of the odes by the Greek poet Pindar, and in that he was kind of he had a poem about these like hidden kind of worlds and cultures within our world, and there was one that they imagined it was just such an idealistic place where all they did was like laugh and dance and drink food and be merry, and he called them the fortunate ones. And that kind of, I suppose, triggered the idea of like, okay, but what if there was this world and, they were considered to be these fortunate people, but that was, I suppose, a lie, and things were not so fortunate within that realm. So that kind of inspired the world building side of things in terms of like Ayala, the protagonist, like she is very much this fierce but also deeply fragile person who is trapped within this situation and this life, which isn't something that she would have imagined or wanted for herself. Um, that was unfortunately very personally inspired. Like at the point of starting to write this book, I myself was in a situation where I just felt trapped. I think by the age of 30, you think that you should have life sorted out and like, you should be kicking all the goals in life. But I kind of hit that point and I was like, what am I doing? I had an existential life crisis essentially. And a lot of those emotions went into creating her character and became a way for me to explore that and work through that. And hopefully she gets a happy ending at the end of this. She will. It's gonna be like romantic fantasy romantasy, so she will. But yeah, it was really, really great kind of exploring that through her and within a fantasy world with challenges that are so far removed from reality, I suppose. But those are probably two of my biggest inspirations.
The trials, so one thing I thought was really cool, so you find out that, yeah, she's this princess who was in like almost this weird exile situation where, I mean, she wasn't like 100% like exiled, but she was sent to become a spy, but her assignment is to be herself, which is wild. And
It's a
you
diabolical plan. Yeah.
yeah, it is. And like there's a point in the book where I was like, oh, okay, I understand why that choice was made. But it was really just kind of an interesting idea. Like you always hear about people who go into these secret societies and they give up their family and they give up their, like they leave everything behind and they leave their name behind. And it's like, okay, and also you're like now you have to pretend that you're pretending to be yourself, which was a wild
Yeah.
twist.
Yeah. Yeah. It is I mean there's a lot of manipulation and mind games in this organization that she's within. So, they've spent the past 10 years kind of stripping her of her identity. And then at the end of that, they've kind of said, now you have to wear it like a mask. And I think it was really fun exploring that throughout and watching her trying to balance those two parts and find out who she was in between and what pieces of her fit in which box. But I think it is a little bit of a twist on that, hidden identity trope where like right from the start we know that she's a princess, we know that she's a spy, so there's no reveal there. But then watching her navigate that in a different way and kind of try to find what her identity is when she is something and then she's trying to be something else, but the thing that she's pretending to be is actually who she is. Yeah, it's a complex situation.
I also really liked her relationships with her friends.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really great. I think it's extremely important for characters to have a good support system. And it was nice, especially with all of the things that go on, that she had such good friends. Nisa specifically, or Sparrow, I believe was her. That was
Yeah,
that was her code name, right?
that was her code name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was like it was really nice that she had this person that she could rely on that wasn't a romantic interest. I don't necessarily want to even talk too much about the romantic interest because that's such a interesting part of, just her journey in this book.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think
yeah.
anything that's said would feel like a spoiler.
I mean, I think that, so you do find out she has an ex who she met through the organization whose code name is Raven, and it is sort of like like it runs hot and cold.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to have a relationship, but they do, and you are always sort of I don't know, I always found myself sort of like wondering what the angle was. And I believe that's sort of the point, especially
Yeah.
like when you are raised in a situation where you're basically told not to trust anyone and you can't have lasting relationships. It was nice to see a lasting female friendship. But
Yeah.
it was, it really did kind of make you question what you were reading when you read the scenes that they had together.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like, I mean, it's a great contrast to have in the story, particularly going forward throughout the series. But I think in terms of like the relationships, Nissa and Ayala's is definitely the strongest. Like they have this ride or die friendship and they would do anything for each other. And I definitely believe that that needs to be the bar that Ayala needs to set for herself. In all of her relationships going forward. I think a lot of the times we kind of, not so much like, I mean, like we kind of take what we're given, and in her situation where she's had so much already stripped from her, she is at this point where she is willing to settle for something that feels like it could add something to her life. I'm trying to figure out a way to frame it without giving away spoilers, but I don't think there's a way that I can. I think people will just need to read it and make of it what they will. But the relationship with the love interest is definitely diversive. I think there will be
Yeah.
like there's a lot of people that are like, oh my God, I love him so much. And then there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I don't like him at all. And that is intentional. That is
Yeah.
intentional.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think hopefully everyone will agree that the prince that she is competing for, so that's the thing, the trials are to become married to this prince,
Yes.
who is just awful.
Yeah.
Um, Hopefully the people who like him are like, he is a good villain. But
Yeah.
again, he's really not a great person at
Yeah.
all. And it was interesting to watch this almost like a weird fantasy version of The Bachelor, where you're watching this and you're watching these women like rip each other apart over this guy who's good looking
Yeah.
and I guess wealthy and powerful. And I'm just like, why? Like,
Yeah.
like but I mean, I suppose there's different reasons for everybody doing it, especially Ayala, who this would not be her choice to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
doing
like
here.
this is absolutely not her choice. And of course, I mean, like you've got the trials which she's needing to compete in to win his hand, and obviously that's for political reasons. But then, like beneath the surface, there's also the heist that's going on with the rest of the team,
Right,
and
yeah.
how they're kind of like using the trials and the distractions around that to kind of like sneak in and sneak out. Um, but it is interesting the number of messages I've received at the point where people meet the prince and they're like, I sense a bait and switch coming on. I think this is the real love interest. And I'm just like, you're gonna regret thinking that in like not even a few chapters.
Yeah, no, I totally see where they're coming from. Without saying too much. Yeah, he's not a great person.
No, no,
Um,
he's horrible. But I suppose I mean like a lot of the competitors and a lot of like just a lot of the people in general within the story, all of their actions are kind of like driven by this pursuit of power. So I think that like, that is a lot of the motivations around like the competitors. They like, they want to become queen. They don't particularly care if this person is not a great guy. But also because it's told from like Ayala's perspective and it's like quite a deep first person point of view, like we're seeing everything from her lens and she is more perceptive when it comes to people's characters because of the training that she's had. So I think as well, like, those other competitors may not see him for what he truly is, whereas she kind of clocks onto it pretty quickly. Um, that also may be partially kind of biased because of the whole she doesn't want to be in this situation. So I think it all kind of just compounds on top of each other.
How many books are you anticipating in the series?
It's going to be a trilogy. Currently a week away from the deadline of my next round of edits on book 2. And that's anticipated to be released toward the end of this year.
If you could pick like a secondary character who was your favorite to write, who would it be?
Definitely Nissa. She is just such a phenomenal character, both like in her role as a friend to Ayala, but also just on her own.
How did you start writing?
I have been writing, I think, since I was like 12 years old. And this is probably one of my favorite stories because I was completely illiterate as a child. I struggled so much with reading. I was no good at English, really. And then I remember being in like reading hour in primary school. I think it was grade 3. And I picked up this book because it had a shiny holographic cover, and I was like, oh my God, this looks so cool. I want to read it. Cracked it open. I couldn't read a single word of it. And then my teacher came along and she like, I just remember her snatching it out of my hands and saying really loudly in front of the whole class, like, this isn't your level, pick something else. And it was the most mortifying experience of my life. So I grabbed another book, but then I did the thing where I grabbed the same book and I hid it behind the cover and I pretended that I could read it because I didn't want all of my classmates to think that I couldn't read it. And I think that really just motivated me to force myself to get to a point. Spite is such a great motivator, isn't it? To force myself to get to a point where I could read these books. So my nan brought the whole series. It was Del Toro Quest by Emily Rodda. Has a very, very special place in my heart. And I pretty much sat down and read, and then I read through the whole series, and then I read it again. And it was like something unlocked in my brain. So it was pretty much from that point on that I just started reading voraciously. And it kind of registered that I was like, oh my God, people do this for a living, like they're authors. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's where the writing and the desire to write started. And I think it was about when I was 12 when I actually started writing. And I mean, I used to really love the world building side of things. So I would sit there and fill sketchbooks with maps of all these fantasy worlds. And it really just progressed from there. And it's something that has been with me ever since and that I've always known that I wanted to do, but something has always kind of held me back from actually pursuing it.
Did you make the map yourself that's in the beginning of the book?
I did not draw it myself. I did send my artist a very, very detailed sketch, which she was very impressed by. So that felt like a compliment. But it was done by illustrator Virginia Allen, who I've just dreamed of working with for as long as I can remember.
Very good. Well, I am looking forward to more in the series. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to stop talking. But I think people are really going to enjoy this one, and I look forward to hopefully chatting with you about the sequel.
Yes, that would be amazing.
All right. So this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was
Braidee Otto.
And we are going to close the chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.